Hello and welcome to the Vermont PBS virtual event 9 to 5, The Story of a Movement. We hope you enjoyed the sneak preview of this new film, and we hope it also inspired you. I am Ronnie Basden, Executive Director of Vermont Works for Women, and excited to introduce you to our guest tonight. Janet Selcer, co-founder of the 9 to 5 organization, joining us from Massachusetts. Hello, Janet.
Hello, glad to be here.
And Carrie Brown, Executive Director of Vermont Commission on Women. Hello, Carrie.
Hello, I'm very happy to be here.
We would love to hear your questions, experiences, or comments for our guest tonight. Please continue to type them on the right side of your screen, and please include your first name and what city you're in. Now let's get started. Janet, I'd like to start with you. Were there any work incidents that launched you personally towards standing up and getting involved in organizing?
Yes, there were. I had been an office worker for 5 years before I knew about 9 to 5. And during that time, I had different jobs, but I was working at the Harvard Business School, which reminds me of the slogan we had for university clerical workers, which was, "We can't eat prestige." And I was working there, and our bosses kept giving us more and more work. We began to feel like we were practically on a assembly line. And so I started a petition and went around to my coworkers, and people were all disgruntled and signed it. And we sent it to our boss. And then Friday of that week at 5 minutes to 5, I was called into his office, and I remember he said, "You don't seem to be happy here." And that was a prelude to being dismissed. So that was kind of the last straw for me. And I was aware that there was a group that was starting to get together, and I sought them out. And the way things worked out, I didn't leave. I became a staff person of 9 to 5.
Yeah, that would do it. So, Carrie, the movement surveys and stories really make me think of the recent work the Commission has done on the Listening Project. Could you tell us more about the project?
Sure. So this was a project that we undertook over the course of about a year and a half, and it consisted of an online survey of about 2,200 people took this survey, and then also a whole lot of people took it in hard copy. We distributed it all around the state, and then we also did a series of community conversations, as well as interviews and one-on-one conversations, to try to get a sense of what are some of the issues that are facing women in Vermont that we don't necessarily hear about all the time. And we got a ton of fascinating information. We asked a lot of very open-ended questions, such as, what are the challenges facing you and women in your community? What do you think is working well? What ideas do you have for improvements that you could make? And it's way too much to get into in a few minutes, but it's just a wealth of information. But we did hear some interesting things. And one of the things that really jumped out at me was women talking about their challenges around work in Vermont, and that many of them told us they were able to find jobs, but they were not able to find good jobs. They weren't able to find jobs that paid well, that had benefits, that had enough hours, that had the flexibility they needed, that had good working environments, that had opportunities for advancement and growth and development. And so along with things like sexual harassment and discrimination, we are still hearing about a lot of challenges that women are facing in the workplace.
Absolutely. And Janet, a quick live question for you. What do the statistics regarding the number of women in clerical, administrative support positions today and versus the 1970s? And are there unions that represent this sector?
That's an interesting question. I don't have the exact number, but I would hazard a guess that it's changed and gone down, because towards the end of 9 to 5 and the Union 925's work, there were a lot of things going on globally and in the country. a lot of the jobs were becoming more and more automated, and call centers and some other clerical functions were moving overseas. And just the advancements with computer technology meant that some of the things that office workers were doing, like filing all the time or typing things for their boss, were just less prevalent than before. So I think that we did see some success with unionizing. We certainly saw success with 9 to 5 as a organization and a movement. Unionizing is a lot harder. And I would say that there were certain industries where it took off more than others, one of them being universities. Harvard University clerical workers did organize. In the film, you saw Cuyahoga Community College, Cleveland College, and the University of Seattle, which still exists as a 925 union to this day, organized. We also saw organizing and publishing. And I think that those women who worked in universities and publishing had some amount of higher expectations that they should advance, that they should be professional. They were more often college educated and felt like they should be going someplace. And what didn't organize were banks, investment firms, insurance companies, where I think conditions were much more harsh for women workers, with typing pools and just a lot of disregard for women's rights. So in the end, certainly public sector clerical workers are organized, but the private sector didn't organize in the massive way that we had hoped.
And can I just jump in on that? That when we look at the wage gap, when we look at the disparities in pay between men and women, one of the areas where we see less of a disparity is among in unions, organized workers. We see less of that. And so, I mean, that's just one of the many ways that being part of a union is good for women. So I'm hoping that catches back on and hope we see more of that, because it's just such a powerful tool.
It is, and it actually was going to lead to my next question for you both. And Carrie, you answered it, but Janet, does it leave you hope for unions and organizing as we move forward today and these statistics become more aware and prevalent?
Well, yes, I do. I think that, sometimes you can't just will change. Conditions have to be right. And then the opportunity for organizing makes change more possible. And I think a variety of factors, including ferocious anti-union effort on the part of bosses, made it very difficult for not only us, but other workers in the country to organize. And, what used to be sort of a proud standard for working people belonging to a union changed. But I think that these things are cyclical and they built on each other. When we started 9 to 5, we were very aware of the history of the labor movement and women in the labor movement. We were very aware that we were standing on the shoulders of people in the civil rights movement. And I think that that's still the case. We, were able to build creative means of winning power. And I see that happening now. Just even in the last 4 years, if you look at the movements that have started, sometimes outside of unions, sometimes within them, a lot of times with the support of the Service Employees International Union, SEIU, the union that we affiliated with, you see that things are really brewing again, whether it's the Fight for 15, organizing among fast food workers and domestic workers, and other movements like Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement. And I think, for us and for these movements, it's not only about organizing, it's about changing cultural perceptions of, what's permissible and what's not permissible. And that's really what makes a movement. Um, and then that movement has to be backed up by organizations. I see that happening again. And, you know, I do have hope that, you know, where there's injustice, there will be organizing.
As an organization in this fight, I'm glad to hear there's still hope out there. So Carrie, I have a question for you from Sarah Mell of Winooski. I'm wondering if we have any data on how many folks are unionized in the state of Vermont. I'm able to find this article from the Burlington Free Press with data from 2016 that says that only 11% of Vermonters are unionized. Is this something that Change the Story might be able to gather and highlight for us?
Yes, so that is actually data that Change the Story, I'll tell folks, is a partnership between the Vermont Commission on Women, Vermont Works for Women, where Ronnie works, and the Vermont Women's Fund. And we've done extensive data collection on the state of women's economic well-being in Vermont. And that is that question about how many women are in unions is one that we pretty recently just looked at. And we're not able to get quite the data that we wanted to get. Although we did find that when you look at public sector unions, we have a slightly higher percentage of women working in the public sector than in a lot of other states, and they are more often represented by unions. And so we have, so it's one of the theories out there as to why Vermont's wage gap is a bit smaller than in most of the rest of the country. It is probably a contributing factor that we have a lot of public employees. We have more people in those public unions at any rate, not so much in the private unions, but the level of union representation in Vermont in general and in the private sector is quite low.
And Carrie, I'll start with you, but Janet, if there's anything you want to also add to this topic, hop in right after. But the 9-to-5 movement members really described an explosion of consciousness during the 1970s that really helped propel change. Are you noticing that now in the current climate in your work or in the work you're seeing across the state for women and girls in the same sort of momentum?
I'm sorry, did you say you?
Yeah, Carrie, I'll start with you in that and the work you're seeing. And then I was going to say if Janet had anything she wanted to add.
So I would say yes. I've been doing some variation of this work in Vermont for decades now, and I've seen it kind of wax and wane or kind of take different forms. And but I would say in the past few years, really since the election of Donald Trump, honestly, there has been a real resurgence and a re-energization of people looking at gender issues, looking at discrimination, looking at the effect that patriarchy has on us. And the Black Lives Matter movement and the Me Too movement really are contributing to that. People kind of looking at what are the power structures that are being foisted on us, and are we really okay with that? So it is very, I also share that optimism that Janet, you were talking about before, that there is a lot of desire for change and a lot of willingness to look very deeply at the structures and the built-in inequities that are causing some of the problems that we see, and to really try to work against that on that kind of fundamental level. So that gives me a lot of hope. Yeah.
I just say that there's, you know, still a huge amount of things to fight for. There's been progress, but there are just so many things that need to be changed, whether it's childcare or parental leave, all those kinds of things. And I think the income gap that is growing and growing is really taking a toll on people, but you know, eventually will have the effect of more organizing. I'm also concerned because during this time of COVID, more women have left the workforce than probably in recent time. When we organized 9-to-5, it had become a time where people needed 2 incomes if they had a family. There was no doubt about the fact that women were working. And when you see something like that, you know, people are really hurting. So we're in a very funny time, and I think it'll take a while to understand what the fallout's going to be. But you know, I I think some more organizing will happen.
You know, given that we are in recovery periods and it is a harder time for many to try to stand up for their rights, but what do you think were and potentially still are those essential ingredients in moving people to organize to stand up for their rights?
Yeah.
Janet, I'll kick back to you.
You know, it's funny when we recruited women to 9 to 5, a lot of times they would say, well, I want to do something, but all the women in my office, they don't care, they won't do anything, or they're too afraid to do anything. But it often wasn't the first people we recruited or the real firebrands that became the most solid members and leaders of 9 to 5. It was women who had pride in their work and might not be the most visibly outspoken, but as I think somebody said in the film, were the ones that people came to when they had a problem, and knew that those people were well respected. And I think in general, to promote organizing and to help people get motivated to do that, it was our job to overcome what seemed like cynicism and was some fear. Couple of things by raising expectations. That was very important. People needed to know that their complaints weren't just their own problem and were justified. So a lot of the things we did, like the Office Workers' Bill of Rights, right off the block in Boston, then every single one of our chapters did the same, was kind of raising a proclamation, you know, we do have rights. And then I think also it was important to have women tell their own stories. We heard a lot of stories in the movie. And I think legitimizing that and basing our actions on what women were really experiencing was very important as well. And then training people to be able to speak for themselves and take leadership. And then last, I think people needed to see success. So in order to convince people that collective action was worth the risk, it was really important for us to do things where we could make small changes at least, and then really proclaim those victories so that people could see that there was a payoff and that they could have some degree of power. And I think going through those experiences allowed women, you know, certainly motivated them, and, you know, allowed women to really begin to fight for their rights. I think that that desire, that feeling was there given people's treatment on the job, but it really needed a vehicle and a meeting place among women to let that happen, and then a plan, a strategy to carry out campaigns for change.
Yeah, that moment in the film where they read parts of the Bill of Rights still gives me goosebumps. And, you know, we're still kind of beating those points down, saying these are still things that are our rights to have in the workforce. Yeah. So Carrie, to that point, what suggestions or potential resources would you suggest for women who want to get involved or help make changes in a bigger way and create equality for all across Vermont?
Well, I think there are some things that can be done through policy change at the legislative level. So for instance, paid family and medical leave is something that we've been trying to get passed in Vermont for quite a while. We not too long ago passed a law about flexible working arrangements. And I don't know that a lot of people know about that, but you have a right in Vermont to request flexible working arrangements if you need to leave early to pick up your child from childcare, so you want to come in earlier in the morning, that sort of thing. You can ask for that without fear of retaliation or repercussion. And we also have wage transparency in Vermont. I'm not sure if everybody knows about that, but you're allowed to share about how much money you make. You're allowed to ask your coworkers how much money they make. They don't have to tell you, but you can ask them. And that's not, these things aren't true everywhere. And they're a big part of knowing, am I being paid fairly? I need to know how much other people are being paid. So that's part of it, I think, knowing about that. And then, I hold out hope for further organizing and for people to kind of seek out the union opportunities if you have any in your workplace, but you have not really been thinking about them, or if you want to connect with the local union, there's plenty of them. And it is a really powerful tool for people to come together and say, this is kind of what we deserve and what we need.
It's funny that comment about it being a right in Vermont to ask people what their salary is. That is so reminiscent to me of what happened when we were organizing. It was completely not okay
Yeah.
to discuss pay, and it was actively discouraged by bosses. It was just something that you didn't do. And of course, when women broke through that, they found all these disparities, and they found so many instances where they had trained a man to be their supervisor because that man didn't know what was going to be needed. The woman was perfectly qualified to do it herself. And then there was a huge wage disparity.
Yeah.
We also found that, I think it's mentioned in the film there too, that the bosses were organizing. They definitely had consortiums where they discussed pay and set wages, which I trust violation, although we couldn't prove it at the time. And so, as was said in the movie, we would tell women, your bosses are organized, so you better organize too. It's funny to hear that, and I'm glad to hear that it's protected in some way in Vermont.
Yeah.
And to the point, what role in a bigger way did training and education play into 9 to 5 relating to its members and developing leadership among its women office workers?
Well, it played a huge role, really. When we started the organization nationally, my job became on the national staff to be the director of organizing and training. We had at peak 18 staff chapters around the country in a lot of the major cities. And we both trained our staff, directors and organizers, to train their members. So there was very regular training sessions about stuff that harkened back to the Midwest Academy that's talked about in the beginning of the film. Not only how to make a speech, but how to pick targets, how to strategize and come up with tactics for a campaign, how to identify what we used to call allies and enemies. And all those skills were ones that we would teach to women on a regular basis. And the other thing is that we started yearly working women's summer schools. The first one was at Kent State in Ohio. Later on moved to Bryn Mawr. But we would then fund our chapters to send their members to these working women's summer schools, and they were wonderful. It was like 3 days, and it was like some giant festival in which women got to talk to each other from around the country. There were tons of workshops and training sessions, and women presenting things themselves and evening activities. And it was another thing that really built leadership. And as far as training goes, there was a lot of examples in the movie about the importance of giving women roles that they could enact and giving them support to do it even when they thought they couldn't. There were so many really talented women that came through our doors that had no experience in any kind of organizational work. And I think the impact of them on taking leadership, learning how to chair a meeting, all those things was just tremendously empowering. It was one of the most wonderful things to see doing that work. And a lot of those women went on to be very active in all kinds of ways, including as union organizers.
You know, that's it really, that dual piece of you can train the skills, but building that confidence and really allowing these women to come into their own leadership roles was really powerful, and really what I think was a great special sauce in how the movement was so powerful. So Carrie, this question is for you. This is from Christy in Burlington. During COVID, women are leaving the labor force in record numbers. Is this an opportunity that you think for grassroots organizing, and what specific union groups are in play on this issue?
So I think this is an opportunity, even though it's also a very, very grim time. And it's unsettling to see the rate at which women are leaving the workforce entirely, where they're looking at having to care for their families and to try to work at the same time. And it has always been a difficult balancing act. Women have always been expected to do more of taking care of their families, do more childcare, do more housework. And then when COVID hit, the amount of time that women spent on those tasks actually went up. And women were really finding themselves bearing the brunt of taking care of kids whose childcare is closed, or who were schooling at home. And I think a lot of women just felt like, okay, this is too much. They were just sort of pushed past the tipping point and threw in the towel. And it's actually incredibly discouraging to me on a bad day, where I can feel like the decades of work that Janet, you, and others like you did has the potential to not be completely undone, but significantly undermined in such a short period of time. It's discouraging to me. And yet, yes, I do think there's an opportunity here, because I think it makes it really clear the profound inequity that we have built into our ideas about the kinds of work that we think women are supposed to do and the kinds of work we think men are supposed to do, and how that just doesn't work out for women, but it also doesn't really work out for families, and it doesn't really work out for our economy overall, because we definitely live in a world now where most families need two incomes, and people need to be at work to keep the whole machine moving forward. And so when we start to see all of these women dropping out, it doesn't just affect them, even though it affects them, it has lifelong repercussions for them individually, but it's also affecting all of us. And so my hope is that there is a better understanding of that. We're certainly seeing how childcare is crucial to all of our functioning, and hopefully that will translate into valuing the pay of childcare workers who are seriously underpaid. And so it's a little bit, I don't want to be, it's trying to find that silver lining, I guess, in there, but I am encouraged by how much I do hear people focusing on those real structural disparities that we have been living with for so long and just kind of making do with. And now we have the opportunity to bust them once and for all.
And to that, do you know of any specific unions in play in Vermont right now doing this work?
I can't speak to that super specifically. Maybe somebody in the audience knows more than I do and can chime in the chat. Yeah.
Have a viewer comment, plug it in. And Carrie, to one of your earlier points, a viewer commented that in one of their jobs, you could be fired for discussing your compensation. When did that become a law?
That was 2013. Well, no, actually, 2013 was when the whole wage transparency thing happened. So hopefully it was before that and not after that, because if it was after that, that's definitely a violation of the law. And I mean, actually, technically, there were two different parts to that. There was the law that you could talk about what you made, and then there was a law about that you could ask other people about what they made, and they passed it two different times. So if that person wants to know more, they can get in touch with me, and I can try to help them figure it out.
Thank you for that. I want to quickly highlight two viewer comments, one for Janet, but a thank you for doing this trailblazing work, and another for Janet and Carrie that says, "You both are our heroes."
Oh.
I thought those were great to highlight very quickly. And I wanted to talk a little bit more, Janet, on the film. how did the 9 to 5 movement, I know it was spoken a little bit about fundraisers, but how did the movement specifically utilize the film when it first came out?
Well, it was interesting. You saw in the movie a couple of clips of Jane Fonda speaking, and some of those took place at our Working Women's Summer School. She came there and she went to a couple of other chapters and really did spend time gathering stories from women. So that was, a tremendous excitement within 9 to 5. But then when the movie came out, as she says, she did premier fundraisers for 9 to 5 chapters in many of the cities. But what we did was hold lunchtime brown bag lunches for women. Like in Boston, it would be at City Hall Plaza. And Jane Fonda would come and speak on people's lunch hour. It was wild. And we were pretty successful at that point, but we were just knocked back on our heels because thousands of women would show up, and also their bosses, sort of lurking in the background. And Jane Fonda would give these rousing speeches. One of our members would introduce her. And while I wouldn't say the lasting effect of that was that they all joined 9 to 5, nonetheless, it really legitimized what we were doing even more, and it certainly got the word out there. It's kind of what happens when celebrities step into causes. It's not the be all and the end all, but it has its place among other things that you might want to do. So it was a really fun and exciting time. And the movie has been tremendously popular all these years. So I think it matched us in using humor as one tactic to unsettle those in power.
Yeah, you saw that at the end of the movie where they talked about that shift where this is ridiculous and it shouldn't be funny and ridiculous because this is what I go to work to the next day. Mm-hmm. So Carrie, I would love it if you would actually tell our viewers a little bit more about the mission of the Vermont Commission on Women.
Sure. So we're a state agency. We've been around since 1964. And when women were earning 59 cents on the dollar that men were making. And we have a very broad mission to advance rights and opportunities for women in Vermont. We do that through education and research and public policy work, as well as we have an information and referral service. So if people have questions, they're looking for resources, they need someone to point them in the right direction to find answers to their questions, they can give us a call or email us and we can do that. We do a lot of research, as we mentioned before, with the Change the Story initiative. Right now, that partnership that we're a part of, we have done a lot of data research. We've also done work with employers and just general public education to try to help educate people about women's economic well-being in Vermont and to try to make some systemic improvements to women's economic security. And we provide testimony to the legislature. We've been working a lot on the paid family and medical leave issue I've been at this job for 9 years, and it had already been going for a long time before I came along. So it's a long-standing issue for us. Yeah.
Well, and thank you. And as our viewers can tell, Carrie is a wealth of knowledge and a resource, as well as the commission is a resource for so many. So if there are more questions, definitely reach out. Janet, this has been such a huge highlight to be able to connect with you, talk more, and really, be able to speak with you about the movie that I was so excited to watch. And I know our viewers were excited to have a sneak preview. So thank you all for joining us tonight and for your questions and comments. But really, again, a huge thank you to our guests and panelists, Janet Selcer and Carrie Brown, who continue to fight in this work each day. The 9 to 5 Story of a Movement will air on Monday, February 1st at 10 p.m. And this talk will be archived on the Vermont PBS YouTube page. Thank you all for being here. Take care. And from Vermont, we hope you all have a wonderful night.